All right, guys and gals, this is Edward Nile from Fat Bastard Press, coming at you with a reading from Chapter 1 of Iron Strife, Book 1 of the Iron Shield Chronicles. This is the start of an epic new series set in a diesel punk world where hulking giant mechs rule. Iron Strife, as we speak, is available on Amazon, and if you use Kindle, then Iron Strife right now is free until February 13th. So if you're interested in the book, if you're interested in the series, go check that out, pick that up. If you want to hear more readings like this one afterward, let me know in the comments. It really helps. And if you do pick up the book and you enjoy it, any reviews you leave, I can't exaggerate how much that helps. So, without further ado, this is Chapter 1 of Iron Strife. I hope you like it. Chapter 1, Fleming Wood Forest. A shell blast shook the ground, blowing a spray of dark soil across the soldiers scrambling within the shallow trench. Aldrin Mal put his hand over the steaming mug of coffee he carried aloft like a live grenade. He hissed as hot liquid lapped against his palm. It didn't matter, so long as no dirt wound up in the beverage. General Reynolds needed little motivation to hand out latrine duty. Aldrin had two ways out of shoveling crap for the next several weeks: deliver the general's coffee or get killed, so he ran as best he could, dodging around his comrades. Assaulted by the ubiquitous boom of artillery fire, neither his helmet nor the cotton wedged in his ears could soften. When his boot snagged on something, Aldrin had a terrifying moment of falling forward before he grabbed the trench wall to catch himself. At least a third of the coffee sloshed out onto his other hand, black and scalding hot, the way General Reynolds liked it. Aldrin bit his lip to hold back a yelp. "Wish I could trade places with you, Yanni," Aldrin thought. A lost leg and some war stories in exchange for civilian life? Aldrin would have made that trade in a heartbeat. His younger brother might have believed in this war, in sacrificing all for his country. But that was because Yannick was crazy. He'd have probably signed up on his own if they hadn't drafted him. The notion bewildered Aldrin. Yannick had been upset, actually upset, that he could not return to this living hell. Having to leave active duty had been a worse blow to Aldrin's brother than the lost limb. Aldrin shambled through a hastily formed triage area, skirting past a pair of men trying to staunch their screaming comrades' spurting arm. Seeing so much blood and hearing the victim's high-pitched shrieking was a painful reminder of his own mortality. Any one of the projectiles pummeling the dirt all around could obliterate Aldrin on impact, reduce him to a red smear in the mud, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Died bringing coffee to some overranked cretin" was not the most flattering epitaph he could imagine. The coffee continued to swish about, splashing between Aldrin's fingers as he traversed the rocky, mud-soaked trench, shaken every other moment by nearby artillery, flinching under the whistle of incoming mortar bombs and the boom of outgoing shells. General Isaac Reynolds came into view, looking across the no-man's land to Fleming Wood Forest through a pair of field binoculars. Shadows flickered in the tree line as the unseen Northerners fired and received ordnance. The thin, hook-nosed general looked like an insect next to his kneeling Kaiser warsuit, the Southern Storm. A shell blast shook the ground and nearly sent Aldrin sprawling, but he managed to grab hold of the trench wall once more. The mud was wet and warm. Aldrin shrank back with a strangled wail. His hand came squelching free of the mess of blood and liquefied entrails, a sludge of human gore left over from where some poor soul had been splattered against the trench's side. Aldrin wiped his hand on his brown coat and tried not to vomit. He failed, only just managing to hold the half-empty cup out of the way as bile surged up his throat. He retched 3 times, leaning over the horror of human remains. A cascade of dirt showered down from a shell blast. Pieces of soil and rock plunked into what remained of General Reynolds' coffee. "To hell with it." Aldrin marched the rest of the way to Reynolds, without a thought for protecting the drink. "Your coffee, General—" "Blasted coward, where is he?" Reynolds didn't look away from his binoculars. "He's stalling, I know it." "Your coffee?" Aldrin repeated. Reynolds lowered the binoculars, looking at Aldrin as though he were a member of some unknown species. "Ah, 'bout time, boy," the general growled after a moment. taking the mug. Any sign of the Virtue from down our line? No, sir. No enemy Kaiser spotted. Plenty of Southern men were getting killed in the meantime, though. By the war codes, they could not pit a warsuit against unarmored troops. Either the Northerners presented a Kaiser, or Reynolds' machine stayed behind while his army moved for the trees, something they would have done 2 hours ago were it not for Reynolds' need to redeem his honor. Bloody curs! The general raised the coffee to his lips. Something large in the trees! Shouted one of the surveyors. Reynolds tossed his mug aside and raised his binoculars once more. Where? Everything else faded out for a few seconds as Aldrin stared at the shattered mug, its dark contents trailing the faintest tendrils of steam as they were sucked into the churned earth, stinking of coffee and blood, half death, his hands burned. All for nothing. You sack of shit. Court-martial be damned, he'd punch the son of a bitch. But Reynolds didn't turn to face him. In fact, neither he nor anyone else seemed to have heard Aldrin as they chattered to one another. On the other side of the field, the treetops shifted, moved by some unseen force. Is it the Virtue? Reynolds asked aloud. Is that bastard going to come out and face me after all? The guns continued to boom, but there was something different in the explosive cadence that Aldrin could not quite place. He felt the change before he realized what it was, cluing in around the same time as one of the men down the line cried out, They've stopped firing! Sir? Said a nearby field scout. The general snapped the binoculars closed with a savage grin. Cease fire and get the storm's lift running. The horn call went out, accompanied by the squawks of field radios down the line. One by one, the Southern guns stopped blasting. The battlefield descended into an unusual silence. In the stillness, sounds of cracking branches and rustling leaves drifted across loud and clear, giving way to a louder crash now and then as entire trees were knocked down. Treetops thrashed about, as though each leaf had a mind and will of its own. They writhed like a mass of green insects, scattering away from a heedless boot. Reynolds climbed onto his lift. The winch hummed to life, bringing him up toward the Storm's open cockpit, located under the warsuit's right arm. He ducked inside, closing the hatch with a loud clang. The enemy Kaiser emerged from the trees a moment later. Southern Virtue, as Reynolds insisted on calling it to this day, had been one of Southern Arcania's flagship warsuits. It was captured in the failed siege of the northern capital, Gorad, along with its pilot, Reynolds himself. After Gorad, Reynolds was released as part of a prisoner exchange agreed upon between Northern President Connor Orvid and the South's Nathaniel Davids. Orvid, however, refused outright to relinquish the captured warsuit. They had instead redubbed the machine and sent it to fight against its former masters. The Kaiser, now stomping across the pockmarked field, had been renamed Retribution by its new pilot, industrialist General Theodore Colmes. Aldrin knew that for Reynolds, this fight was more of a personal vendetta than a conflict of war. And for this showdown, he'd stripped his own army of what little advantage they could have had in the assault, had they been allowed to press the march. It did not take a master tactician to surmise that much. The shouts of the injured contested with the earth-trembling strides of mechanized feet and the roar of massive diesel engines. Aldrin closed his eyes, already smelling the distinct smell of fumes on the spring air. After all the crap you made us go through, I really will punch you if you botch this, rank or no rank. Aldrin would have a better chance at staying alive in prison. The Storm's massive gear joints rattled and clanked, its pistons pumping like muffled gunshots, steel screaming in ineffectual protest as thousands of tons of machinery rose to a full towering stance. The Storm stood. When it came to a warsuit, the word stood did not do the action justice. 80 feet of iron monstrosity reared into the sky like a slow volcanic event. Sunlight glinted off the Storm's multiple periscope lenses, gleamed against the muted gray of the warsuit's carapace. Like Reynolds himself, his machine was austere, without any of the pomp or flair others added to their Kaisers. Some said this was an example of the general's commitment to the cause of disarmament, refusing to revel in his use of the very weapon the South fought to get rid of. As for Aldrin, he thought the man was just an unimaginative stick in the mud. One splash of color could be found in the red and blue Arcanian flag fluttering on a pole jutting between the Kaiser's exhaust pipes. The red Arcanian star, sending out 7 crimson rays, one for each province in the Arcanian nation. 3 of those beams represented industrialist provinces, provinces who chose open rebellion over the relinquishing of their warsuits. Many, on both sides of the conflict, wanted 3 red beams removed. President Nathaniel Davids refused, saying that would amount to acknowledging the secession of the Arcanian North and give legitimacy to industrialist claims. If Arcania, all of Arcania, did not decommission its warsuits and heavy naval destroyers, it would mean not only the continuation of war with Zhang, but a new conflict with the Lighten Empire. No, Aldrin thought as he watched the storm take its first step into the shell-blasted no-man's land. So long as the industrialists held their ground, there would be no peace. If Aldrin was honest with himself, he was not sure the bloodshed would ever stop, regardless of who won. The previous quivers of artillery fire were nothing compared to the earth-shaking tremors these behemoths created as they stomped toward one another. Whereas the storm was designed to look more or less humanoid, the much older Retribution resembled a large cylinder with legs and arms. Retribution bristled with machine guns and was fitted with massive serrated bayonets beneath both arm cannons. The left blade ended in a hook designed to tear enemy armor. A soldier nudged Aldrin, motioning for him to move. Uniformed men all around scrambled to get out of the way of the impending battle. Aldrin evacuated the immediate area with the others and watched from down the trench line as the warsuits faced off. From Retribution's back fluttered the industrialist flag, a white gearwork sword on a black field. The northern warsuit stopped halfway across the field and waited for the storm to meet it. With each booming step Reynolds' machine made, black fumes spurted from its twin exhaust pipes, the smoke gathering about its head in acrid clouds. More noxious smoke billowed downward from secondary pipes and along the machine's body, wreathing the trenches in a bitter smog. Aldrin coughed and covered his mouth, as even from this distance he tasted the sting. His eyes watered, but he didn't have it in him to move for higher ground like the others. Something between terror and awe kept him rooted in place, hiding beneath ground level like a hare in its burrow. He'd never seen a warsuit in combat before. And despite his fear, despite his reticence about the war and his place in it, this was something Aldrin knew he had to witness. Kaiser engines and the warsuits they powered were the great marvel of modern science, wonders of human engineering, but something about the gargantuan shape blocking the afternoon sun bespoke of the distant past, its booming steps taking Aldrin back to a time of oversized beasts wandering free in a world untouched by man. It also made him think of something else. Wreathed in smoke, which reflected the red fury of engine flares, its carapace catching the fire and sunlight as though the machine were alive with flame, the warsuit made Aldrin think of the demons of Scripture. Here was a being of dark myth. Mankind had tamed the demon and made it their own. Did that mean this was hell? Lost in the closest thing to a religious experience he'd ever had, Aldrin didn't hear the other soldiers calling his name until one of them, Aldrin's friend Welland, shook him by the shoulders. "Al, we've got to get out of here." Aldrin looked around, blinking to dispel his daze. His comrades had all moved up out of the trench as the smoke grew thicker. The air behind the storm was completely cleared of personnel to prevent casualties when the Kaisers began their duel. Reynolds' warsuit kept up its stomping approach. Even from here, Aldrin could feel the ground shiver. Retribution waited, its gearsword flag fluttering with the machine's exhaust discharge. Welland pushed Aldrin from behind to keep him moving. He shambled along until he was helped up a wooden ladder by the others. All around, men unfolded wooden chairs and laid out coats and blankets to sit on. A few passed around flasks and cigarettes as they placed bets. A pair of soldiers near Aldrin struggled to get a field radio working. Finally, after several curses and slaps, the device crackled to life. A moment later, Reynolds brought his warsuit to a stop in front of his opponent. The voices of the 2 pilots hissed from the small radio. All right, friends, that's going to cut it for now. I did intend to read the entire chapter, but seeing as this is already about 20 minutes, I am going to just end it here at the halfway mark. If you want me to read more, let me know, and I will finish off this chapter. I ultimately would like to record the entire book and throw it up on Audible, but I'm very new to narration, and so I just want to get a feel for it and make sure that I can come across coherently. And if I sound good and you find it entertaining, then all the better. That being said, I am going to sign off for today. I hope to have an episode of the Fat Bastard Podcast up next week on Friday, where me and my fellow author Joseph Morton, where we discuss science fiction-y things and various shenanigans. So if you're interested, that'll be up next week. If you do pick up Iron Strife, again, free on Kindle, shameless plug. If you do pick up Iron Strife, just know that Iron Valor, Book 2 of the Iron Shield Chronicles, is ready, and it's going to be out in March. Guaranteed. So if you read the first book, you like it, don't worry, there's more to come. I intend to do monthly releases of each of the volumes. I am right now doing the editing on Book 4. So, really exciting stuff. And I've got all the covers, and they're all gorgeous, which is not me tooting my own horn so much as saying I have hired some really great cover artists over my time doing this, and they're all just amazing. The original artwork that goes into the cover for Iron Strife that you'll see on the video here on the background, assuming I did that correctly, the mech, the painting, was all done by John Anthony Di Giovanni, who is a Canadian artist. Just terrific work. Anyways, this has been Edward Nile with Fat Bastard Press. Hope to see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.